kind of scary, actually, if you think about it that way. But model-dependent realism teaches us that each of these models are useful as a tool that we've created historically at different times, depending on our technology and our observations and so on. But they're all still useful. And so the only thing that seems to be wrong is when you say that that model is false. Unless, of course, it is. Like for example, Galileo pointing out that Venus doesn't go around the Earth, it goes around the sun, right? So you can find, something wrong with a model and fix it, but the idea is, of course, that we have all these different models. In fact, some think we might have an infinite set of possible models that as we need them, we'll invent them and they'll be useful for something. Rupert Sheldrake is kind of interesting. If you've listened to him at all, he talks about the idea that there's spirit in all life that's all interconnected in an interesting way. Can't really prove it, can't really tell much about it, but it's intriguing and it fits with a lot of the models that we have inherited from our ancestors. So that's pretty interesting. But, and here's really the important thing about that, model-dependent realism just doesn't concern the models of the universe. It concerns the models that we have that explain why we might think of the country as politically divided. Right? We've got, maybe a certain number of folks that look at things from one model of how things ought to be, and other people that look at things from another model of how things ought to be. Obviously, those models are useful to those folks, or they wouldn't believe them. They do appear to be contradictory models in some ways, like the strict, parent model of raising children versus the loving, tender-hearted, person. There's different models of child rearing, different models of mental characteristics. Are you mad? Are you crazy? Are you a genius? There's all these different models out there. Are you infested with a demon? Is that what explains why you're behaving the way? Are you addicted? One of my friends is a lawyer, and we were talking just the other day about comparing how you evaluate a jury. When you're going the voir dire, doing the voir dire part, to decide who you want on the jury. The prosecutor wants a jury that's made up of people that believe in free will. Because otherwise, how can you convict somebody unless they chose to do what they did? If you believe that everybody is totally determined by their experiences and what happened, and any of us in their position would have done exactly the same thing, right? How could you find them guilty of something? Because we all would have been guilty. It's not their fault. It's the environment, or it's the government, or it's the neighborhood, or and he found that really intriguing. Of course, he is a retired lawyer now, and he's thinking back of all those juries and wondering, is that what I was trying to do? Make sure that the people I selected for the jury as a prosecutor, they would believe the person was freely capable of choosing not to do whatever it was they did. Well, those are models, right? So all these different kinds of models seem, in this newer perspective that we look at today, as a more useful way of thinking about how we conceive of our experiences, because it gives you more tools. The more tools you have, the more likely you're able to have the right tool for the job, depending on what job you're going to have. Of course, there are some jobs where you end up, well, wait a minute, if I use this tool, I'll get this result. If I use this tool, I'll get this result. What result do I really want out of this? And that's where we need the model of our narrative, what we believe to be true, right? In a sense, tying in our memory, what's the best way to remember things? We remember things pretty well if they're in stories. I remember he moved from over there to over here. They changed the tables.
It's not over there.
I know, there's no there there.
You can't sit over there anymore.
Yeah, I don't know who did that. Sorry about that. We can always turn it back, you know. Somebody changed the model of our classroom.
I did.
You're usually the only one that laughs at my jokes. So.
I don't know
See?
about that.
See how that works? Okay, so model-dependent realism, fascinating subject, still working on it. Of course, we're working on all these. By the way, I'm very fallible, I've learned that. Not only anything I tell you guys, I've learned it from someone else, so I didn't think it up. But at the same, and I might not be able to tell you where I got it from, because I might not have remembered it at the moment. But, okay, next thing. So, pious. When we think about the Euthyphro, which you go back, talk about Socrates. Why did they kill him? This is, I think, a prime example of the reason that he got people upset. He started asking questions about the definitions of things. Clearly, Euthyphro, as a priest, is a believer in the poetic stories that the Greeks of his day, and Socrates, of course, you know, he's very well aware of what their beliefs are, but he's now asking questions about what it means to be pious. And as you can see in this dialogue that's focused on piety, how to be pious to the gods. And of course, remember, Socrates' main reason for asking this is because he's going on trial for not being pious in the community. So people are considering him evil for corrupting the youth, teaching them to question their elders and so on. Which he was. He was doing that, right? But in this case, he's going to do the same thing to Euthyphro and start asking the question about what it means to be pious. So I just highlighted pious, and you can see as it goes through the dialogue here, but Euthyphro, your knowledge of religion and of things pious and impious, so very exact. I mean, he's, praising this guy for what he's going to demonstrate. He doesn't really know at all what he's talking about, at least from Socrates' point of view, right? And he's there to charge his father with being impious, right? So what does it mean to be pious? There are lots of different kinds of pious acts. What's the general idea which makes all pious things to be pious? You see how it's a definition, and all the dialogues seem to be focused on a particular definition. You see how that works, right? And I think it's also neat that the name of the dialogue is somehow significantly associated with the topic. There's an interesting thing where they argue that in the original Greek text that the topic of the text was exactly the word in the middle of the text. There's all kinds of intriguing thinking that he loved 12. That there's 12s in the arrangement of the dialogues, 12s in the lines. The number 12. Plato, who's the author of the text, may have certainly been a Pythagorean. And Pythagoreans, if you remember, their arche, the basic building block of the universe, is number. The divided line, and the way music seems to be associated with strings and numbers. How things themselves, if you have just one, there's it's not visible at all. It doesn't have any shape, any substance. It's invisible. But if you have two, then you have a line, so you can at least see it. Maybe air is like a line. Number three, might be a little bit more shaped like a triangle. It could be fire, associated with fire. Four could be earth, and so on. So the numbers are also associated with the shapes of things and so on. So how pious shows up in the dialogues and so on, kind of interesting. And notice they're right away making a difference, a claim between the pious and the impious, as if things are either the one or the other, right? Black and white kind of thing. By the way, when we're talking about models and thinking about the way we perceive things through these models, through these conceptual schemas, don't forget our language is kind of like our operating system. So that if you're speaking English and someone's speaking Chinese, it's almost like you're trying to communicate between a PC and an Apple. Maybe that's not a fair comparison, but you get the idea. That wait a minute, how can they think? When we talk about Aristotle, we'll notice that to have a true statement requires you to have a grammatical structure that's similar to Greek, which English is. When they talk about going Greek, there's a lot of things associated with that. Not just wearing a toga, which, by the way, was Roman. That's really bugs me. You go to a frat party and everybody wears a toga. That's not Greek. That's the official outfit of the Senate in Rome. That's what a toga was. But your language itself. I don't. Anybody speak Chinese? Or any other Chinese-like language? No. Me neither. But I'm really curious about it because, from what I understand, they don't have the verb to be. The verb to be. I don't know how else to explain that. But so we'll see that when we talk about what a true sentence is. Okay, so pious and impious, you read through this. Is it important to actually read through a text, or should you be comfortable just having a summary of it? That's the question I asked ChatGPT. Good question. To say what all the gods hate is impious and what they love is pious. I made a joke. I suggested, what the different interviewers are asking the potential office holders that Trump has suggested or nominated for offices. What they really want to ask is, will they say no to Trump? If they think something is wrong and Trump shouldn't do it, will they actually have the guts to say no? Or are they all of the sort of person that will just do whatever Trump wants, regardless of whether it's right or wrong? So it gets down to the question, is the pious or the holy is beloved by the gods because it is holy? Or is it holy because it is beloved of the gods? So in a sense, does Trump love the pious or the legal because it's legal? Or is the pious because Trump loves it, right? So if your boss tells you we do this, you want to do that. What if it's illegal? Well, the question, of course, seems to be, well, maybe he's the one that makes it legal or illegal, by his decision. An old quote from Nixon, an interview that Nixon had, where he said, if the president does it, it's legal. And we've even had the Supreme Court kind of support that point of view, actually. So that's where the Euthyphro seems to be such intriguing dialogue, because it puts that into question. Notice it doesn't answer the question. That's part of what makes Socrates so frustrating to people, is that he asks these questions, but he doesn't, at least in the early dialogues, he doesn't know the answer himself, which strikes me as really that's the wiser way to go. What'll happen in the middle dialogues is all of a sudden Plato starts answering all the questions as if he knows the answers, and that's going to lead us